time, government was holding about 96% shareholding in NIB. So it was easy even to sell about half of that to raise the minimum capital to capitalize the bank. That was the arrangement. That 96% came to was realized because the NIB wanted to acquire the investment by the regulator. So when the NIB buys that will get about 96%, and then NIB will be able to sell half of that to raise the money. But fast forward, I think the Ministry of Finance did not agree to the selling of Nestle shares. Rather, the Ministry of Finance took the Nestle share and exchanged it with a sort of instrument, that is a bond. As to whether the bond was actually credited to the NIB account, I cannot tell for now unless somebody within the NIB circle is able to prove. So you will realize that there is some intention to mutilate the books of NIB to look bad, so that things of this nature will be happening today. Even before the recapitalization, you also recall that the NIB was going through some legal, processes. And these legal processes started from 2004 when a promissory note was given to some safe haven investors. But that was crystallized along the line. The management said that they didn't want to pay because they didn't think that the MD at that time had the backing of the board to give that promissory note. So that lingered on until the Supreme Court gave a verdict in favor of the bank. That brought a huge relief. So that relief, when that relief came, the only thing that NIB to do is to activate one of the two models that I told you earlier on. That was when the Finance Ministry came in and took the Nestle shares. Of course, when the matter was in court and the new government came, there were attempts by new government for the matter to be withdrawn from court. And thankfully, the board at that time did not agree. So these are the perspectives you should be looking at the whole thing. So fast forward, the government established an SPV called Ghana Amalgamated Trust, which was to invest in NIB, a form of a bailout. Again, those in the circle of NIB should indicate whether indeed GATT was able to get the investment that was announced by the regulator to the entire world. So that is the problem of NIB, and many things were happening which did not allow NIB to actually correct its books. They did retrenchment, several retrenchments, pending this exercise that we are hearing today. Of course, they still have huge assets across the country. Another model was that to package some of the assets and realize, then you use the proceeds to do the recapitalization. That model was also not approved by the Finance Ministry. So one will be asking whether it was intentional to ensure that the NIB goes down like this, so that we have a bank which is not publishing financial statements as required by the regulator and by the industry, and the regulator allowed this to be going on for quite a long time without allowing the cogent measures that were in place to be activated to revive the bank. So that is a historical perspective. Now, when a bank wants to buy another bank, it is seen as one of the organic motives, and so long as the acquiring entity or the bank that wants to merge with the weaker one, itself is weak. The directors will never go to a board meeting and say that we want to merge with NIB, which books have been mutilated to that level. So you realize that it is an intention of somebody outside the directors, which is imposing this on the directors to take. Because the directors will be focusing on how to correct their books, how to ensure that they come to profit-making entity, especially as they are listed banks. The directors will never be contemplating of taking, so to say, a toxic institution like NIB because of the books to come and add to their listing. So I think that is just a desire by somebody outside the bank, and we need to fish out that somebody outside the bank, outside the NIB to do that. Then one has to be very careful about the asset base of NIB. As I said, NIB had assets across the country, especially at prime areas. How is the takeover being contemplated? Is it only the bank that is being contemplated? Because the exercise that was done under the banking sector cleanup, there was a situation where assets have been misclassified and given a name that they cannot be realized. And when that happens, we may be experiencing a situation where juicy assets will be separated from the core activity of the bank and taken over by another institution, which will also create a problem, and that will feed into the state capture of institutions. So that also has to be looked at critically. Then the next point is that a regulator who has 64% NIV, and the interest of that regulator as a shareholder is to the effect that they want to take over another institution that they might have interest in. That is strange to be seen in the banking sector. In any case, the regulator needs not to have shareholding in the commercial entities that they are regulating. And that argument will come to play along the line when the deal goes through for the regulator to relinquish its shares to whoever they will choose at a future date, which we should be curious about. And of course, I do know during the banking sector cleanup, one institution was established without a parliamentary, approval. If you look at Article 192 of the Constitution, Article 192 says that any public operation should be established only with Act of Parliament. So you can fish out and see which of the institutions up to date has not gotten parliamentary act, and that should also be curious. We should also be looking at that. What will be the implication going forward? And so long as NIB and ADB are established by a parliamentary act or an act of parliament, it means that Parliament will have to approve these deals. And what the nation should be looking at is to get parliamentarians who are assertive, who actually love the country, who love the financial landscape. We do not want to see a situation where in the past we explain the difficulty of Ghana Amalgamated Trust investment in some of these banks. We said it with it, but Parliament went ahead to approve Ghana Amalgamated Trust, and we are all seeing what is happening. They brought them, whether they are able to capitalize NIV is there for all of us to see. So the ball is actually with Ghanaians. It's actually with Parliament. This is not the time that Parliament should fail the people of Ghana and the economy again.
Okay, so that is left to Parliament. That is your call to Parliament. But if you're clear in your mind that this is not being pushed from the boardroom of either bank, or the Bank of Ghana will not do this, then who do you suspect is pushing this agenda?
I believe the government shareholding in NIB and ADB, I think ADB government has about 21%, and then I take it that it's not 21%. I take it that it's around over 30%, because since GATSI is also sponsored SPV by government, I'm adding their shareholding of 11% to that of government. Then, of course, I can also add the shareholding of the regulator to government. So, and all those shares of government are represented by Finance Ministry. So you can do the mathematics.
So the Finance Ministry?
Definitely, yes.
Because I listened from the beginning. Did you, by your narrative, are you suggesting that NIB no longer holds their Nestle shares?
Yes.
It is not in their hands?
That shares has been transferred long time ago, and with the promise of crediting NIB with a bond. But as I said, whether that bond has actually come or not, that is what we interrogate. Because it's a trade-off. As to why it should even be a trade-off, it's difficult to appreciate. So those are the things we should be looking at. Then another very simple move is that the government should pay the contractors. You see, the contractors' money is in twofold. The benefit of the bank from the contractors' money and the money that goes to the contractors themselves. So even if the benefit of the bank from the contractors' money is paid to the bank, that will go a long way to put the bank on right footing to do its development financing that it has been doing since inception. Even though NIB acquired universal license, they have been doing huge activities in development finance. And that cannot be taken away. That has influenced the economic drive of this country. You will see the number of the erstwhile presidential special initiatives that were sponsored by NIB. Of course, that created a huge problem for NIB in terms of the debt. But you see NIB development finance in the rubber area. in the housing sector, that cannot be underrated. And this should be incentive to revive NIB and not to bury it.
Now, listening to you carefully, in fact, the phrase and the wording you use is mutilated. The move is to mutilate NIB books to make the books look bad. Will the government that is attempting to do that so that it can put NIB in the position to do what they are proposing now be interested in fixing it?
Well, if a bank, remember the bank established by an act of parliament is a public corporation, and let's put it bluntly, it's a company limited by shares, and the board takes the highest decision. Of course, in few areas, the shareholder will be called in. But remember, from corporate governance as it relates to the Companies Act, the only time that shareholders speak about the entity called the bank is at the shareholders meeting. So, if at the least situation, the shareholder comes in, that means that there is interference. So that is the reason why the reforms that ought to be undertaken to save the banks were not taken. They were cogent models. So those cogent models was to be approved by the shareholder, and the shareholder said no. So every genuine and compelling model was not approved by the shareholder. So what do we think that we should conclude? So the shareholder wants the bank to be mutilated, to become valueless, and then it will go off.
So the ball is in the court of parliament now, if this ever comes up.
I think so. But when it comes to these things, we need to be apprehensive what parliament can do. We need to be apprehensive because of the experiences in the financial sector. You recall the banking sector cleanup. No parliamentary approval was sought. They will spend the money and do whatever they want to do before, in fact, even to go to parliament to present was an issue. So I think parliament has the power, but we ought to be apprehensive about what can happen. And that is why parliament will have to call to exercise good conscience in these matters.
Prof, always a pleasure talking to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Professor John GATSI is Head Business School, University of Cape Coast, joining the discussion on the proposed moves to merge ADP and NIB.